This is The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist and anti-authoritarian radio show broadcasting out of occupied Salagi land in southern Appalachia. We bring you voices and perspectives from projects and struggles all around the world. This is a podcast special featuring the voices of three warriors who were on the barricade on the road to the Unist'ot'en Camp at the Gidimt'en Access Point. Yves Saint, who is a Wet'suwet'en land defender, and Spice, a Tlinket land defender, and Shilo Hill from Onandaga Nation, Haudenosaunee, Six Nations, were there to defend un-ceded Wet'suwet'en land from the Canadian state's violent imposition of the Coastal GasLink pipeline. They talk about what brought them to the Gidimt'en Access Point near so-called Houston, BC, the buildup to the impending raid by RCMP troops, indigenous sovereignty, land and water defense, the long road to decolonization, and the importance of outside support and solidarity from indigenous and First Nations peoples, as well as their allies and accomplices. This morning at about 5 a.m., the RCMP began the raids and arrests in an attempt to impose an injunction and clear the land and water defenders from the Wet'suwet'en territories. Media has been detained and released, and at the time of this publication, 6 land defenders have been arrested and have refused to sign the conditions imposed by the Canadian state, and so are still in state detention. Members of the Wet'suwet'en First Nation are asking for people to take solidarity action in support of their autonomy. Solidarity actions have looked like a lot of different things over the last few months across Turtle Island, so-called USA and Canada. Take a moment and listen to your heart. Find your friends and do what you think needs to get done to get the ball rolling. That's my suggestion. You can keep up with the news at the Unist'ot'en website, Unist'ot'en.camp, or on Facebook or Twitter. There's also a Wet'suwet'en Access Point at Gidimt'en Facebook or Instagram. There's also the sites yintaaccess.com or linksummitsU.com, all of which will be present in our show notes. You can also keep up on solidarity actions posted on the following anarchist and autonomous sites: Montreal Counter Info, which is up at mtlcounterinfo.org, North Shore Counter Info at north-shore.info, or itsgoingdown.org. Would you please introduce yourselves with whatever names, pronouns, and affiliations you'd like to use for this conversation?
Hello, my name is Yves Saint. I am a Wet'suwet'en land defender, and I go by she, her.
My name is Ann Spice. I'm a Tlinket land defender, and I go by she, her, or they, them.
My name is Shilo Hill. I'm from Onandaga Nation, Haudenosaunee, from Six Nations, and I go by he, him.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me and share your stories with the audience. I was wondering what brought you all, because you're not all from, well, first off, can you tell listeners where you are right now and what brought you personally to be at the Gidimt'en Access Point?
Sure. So we are at Gidimt'en Access Point, which is 44 kilometers along Logging Road, close to Houston, so-called BC. It is along the road on the way to Unist'ot'en Camp. So anyone who wants access to Unist'ot'en territory has to travel through this access point, which is Gidimt'en clan, which is one of the 5 clans of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, and Cassia House Group. So we're on the territory of Was, who's the head chief of Cassia House. And here sort of ahead of the Unist'ot'en Camp, and Gidimt'en has set up this camp to provide solidarity to the Unist'ot'en and also to sort of help protect that space and the space of the healing center from any further invasion. So we're here behind the blockade. There's no access to this logging road past 39 kilometers after the eviction of Coastal GasLink workers on January 4th. And so we've been out here for the past month at Gidimt'en Access Point in a space that's right now free of RCMP, free of any industrial workers, but they are looming in nearby towns ready to enforce their injunction. That's the sort of last month. I think that there's a longer story about why each of us are here that goes back further than that, but maybe some others want to speak to it before I move on.
Hey, Eve here. Yeah, what brought me here is my dad's Wet'suwet'en. He's actually the house chief of this territory, so he's Was. So I'm here to help defend the territory of my ancestors. And I come from Toronto. I left my life in Toronto to be here, and it's my family. It's my family that's being affected by this project. We have Highway 16 that runs along the nearby towns that you access through these camps. So my family is like greatly affected. So that's another reason why I'm here, along with protecting the territory.
This is Shilo. What brings me here? I was pretty much born into it, raised by, around activists. I was in Caledonia. I was in Standing Rock. I've always stood strongly against pipelines and, land theft. And my partner's family is from here. And we just, us Haudenosaunee really believe in standing with other nations in hard times like this. And so I came here to really just kind of offer my hands and then kind of try to relay information to some people back home and just be extra hands and a body around here and, to support the Wet'suwet'en's decision in evicting CGL. Yeah, that brings me here.
Thank you. Would someone go a little more into depth about like what this current struggle against CGL and why there's the need for the checkpoint, or like what Coastal GasLink is, for instance?
What is CGL? Those figures. Okay, so the Coastal GasLink pipeline obtained a court injunction in order to access Unist'ot'en territory and Wet'suwet'en territory over a year ago. And that injunction process has allowed them to circumvent the access protocols that Wet'suwet'en people had instituted on their territory, and specifically the Unist'ot'en village's free, prior, informed consent protocol, which has been in place for the past 10 years in that space and is also reflective of protocols for accessing territory that have deep roots in Wet'suwet'en law and have always been in place. So it's always been the case that Wet'suwet'en people have controlled access to their territories and have had protocols against trespass and consequences for trespass on those territories as well. And so what Coastal GasLink was able to do through their injunction is to completely disregard the hereditary chiefs and the Unist'ot'en and other neighboring clans when they said no to the pipeline. And so that injunction process has allowed them to force their way onto the territory to begin work on the pipeline. It has allowed them to build a man camp in behind Unist'ot'en Camp, threatening the safety of indigenous people, women, Two-Spirit people in that space. And so that was the reason for the eviction, is that they continued to build, they continued to contaminate the land and water, they continued to destroy animal habitats and berry patches and archaeological sites, cultural heritage in the back of the territory, and to bring in their industrial workers with all the violence that entails. And they've been doing that for the past year. So that injunction allowed them to force their way in without consent and asked the RCMP to enforce that. And that's what caused the raid on Gitdimt'en Access Point on January 7th of last year. So now we're back in the same situation. RCMP are gathering to try and remove indigenous people from this territory and to make sure that Wet'suwet'en people cannot continue to have access and control over access to the territory. So the decision that the chiefs made to evict CGL was a response to that court process, the response to the fact that the injunction and all of the Canadian laws that support that injunction are based foundationally on the elimination of indigenous people and the theft of our lands. And so this is hereditary chiefs pushing back against that and reclaiming their territory and reasserting indigenous law And we're all here to help support that decision and to help enforce that decision. So, yeah.
And also, this is pretty critical because this is not the first project that is tried to get through these territories. There was 13 other projects trying to go through Wet'suwet'en territory. And so even just by Unist'ot'en being there, that obviously means no consent, no trespass. Like it's a no. So it's a critical time right now. And I mean, being here, having these camps, and also with like the RCMP, they set up an exclusion zone on 27, and are, like as Anne was saying, controlling access to Wet'suwet'en people who can enter the territory on our own lands. This is unsurrendered, undefeated land, Wet'suwet'en land. So this goes back to like the 50s on the pass system and the government. And this is what RCMP does. So like these are invaders that are controlling who access our own home territories. And so like it's a critical time that we're doing this stand right now. And with the hereditary chiefs not backing down and making a stand, we are here to follow that direction and to be here.
Sort of an understanding that I have of like the way that colonizer law operates is that it, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to always be based, like it seems to come down to it's imposed in the ways that power wants it to be imposed when it wants to be imposed, and not necessarily like a fair and accurate across the board assessment. So as an anarchist, I don't really trust the laws that people pass because they're very easy, and like history just shows the governments going back on the statements that they make and the treaties or what have you. But the United Nations recently like weighed in about Canadian imposition on sovereign and unceded Wet'suwet'en land, which is kind of featured in this story in Ricochet Media that the Unist'ot'en Twitter just shared recently. And they kind of point out that the so-called British Columbian government passed a recognition of the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. Can you talk about this, and do you think that has had or will have any impact on how the federal, or how the federal Canadian government will engage with this project and such?
Yeah, so I think what the provincial government is showing us right now is the complete failure of recognition politics. So John Horgan, who's the Premier of British Columbia, came to the Wet'suwet'en Feast Hall and talked about the desire to work with Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs towards recognition of Aboriginal rights and title. He spoke about the unceded nature of these territories, and his government has pitched itself as one that's they want to be the first province, and they, on paper are the first province to actually legislate the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. Then, after the eviction and the granting of the injunction, he has turned around and just said that the rule of law applies in British Columbia. So they make their own rules, and they shape their rules for their own purposes. The passing of that UNDRIP legislation, they've said, is just forward-looking. So I guess they only have to respect the rights of Indigenous people in the future and not in the present. And so, yeah, it's very clear that that's just a political game, that he was playing with Indigenous rights to win political points. And when it really comes down to it, he doesn't give a shit about us, and isn't going to actually implement anything that would allow us to have a say over our territories, or would allow actually the right to say no to development on the territories, which is enshrined in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. So if they are serious about free, prior, and informed consent, you have to be able to not consent. And that's clearly not an option for us when we're looking at the industrial invasion of territory. So to me, it just shows how disingenuous that government is, how rigged that system is to continue to promote the theft of Indigenous land, and that's really the end goal of this whole thing, is that they, want their profits, and they're imagining benefits for a future population that isn't us, that isn't Indigenous people. And so that just has been really clear over the last little while, as we've seen how this government has reacted. And the federal government has been hands off. Like, Justin Trudeau doesn't even want to talk about it. He's saying that this is provincial jurisdiction and that it has nothing to do with the federal government. So, I mean, that ship has sailed on the federal level. We know that they aren't going to be responsive to Indigenous rights, and that all of the talk of reconciliation was, just lies, and it was a veneer to try and win political points, and none of it is based in any sort of real desire for change or real willingness to risk anything on behalf of Indigenous life and health.
I have something to add to that. Even with this action alone, with the hereditary chiefs evicting CGL, that is reclaiming our Indigenous sovereignty, because of the Canadian government only caters to themselves, and we have no rights. The system was built to take, and was built on Indigenous genocide. So this action alone, it just is huge, because also it shows other Indigenous people that they can stand up and reclaim. We have to do, this is the last resort. This is the last resort that the people had to come to in order to take action, in order to land back. This is 32 days, 33 days land back. Woo! Woo! Yeah. So this is how we have to take our power back. This is how we have to, because our Indigenous rights, our sovereignty will never be respected. We will never be seen as equal in the eyes of the Canadian government, or let alone any type of government. So these are the steps that we have to take in order to get our power back, in order to be recognized. And also that we have hereditary systems, hereditary laws that go back before this colonial justice system or this colonial law. So that reclaiming that, and also maintaining that, the hereditary Wet'suwet'en chiefs have always had that system in place. It's an old system, old ceremonies. These names that these hereditary chiefs carry go back thousands and thousands of years. So just this alone is a celebration. Every day is a celebration. Every moment, every action is a celebration. Every support that is out there is a celebration. We are united. We are in this together, inside and out.
Obviously, the RCMP engaged very violently a year ago at the, when they raided the access point. Can you talk about what the buildup that you've seen appears to be, and how they've been engaging with folks in neighboring communities, and how you expect them to engage with the access point?
So they've been building up forces for a while in neighboring communities. During the period of time that the province was negotiating with hereditary chiefs, which was over the past week, there was supposed to be a suspension or a pause on the enforcement of the injunction, but they were still coming out to 39 kilometers to harass land defenders there, and have been patrolling the area and the whole surrounding area. We've seen tactical teams. There's just the same kind of buildup that we saw last year is happening now. The RCMP statement today talked about how they wanted to use the least amount of force possible, but also basically, pitched options that would just allow us to, consent to our own dispossession, or make decisions about how to be removed from the territory. Yeah, so I mean, they're just proposing a kindler, gentler invasion, and there's no softening of genocide. So it's just, yeah, it's again just they're full of keywords and jargon, and they want to throw reconciliation in there, and they want to talk about consent and being gentle and not using too much force. But yeah, you can't you can't be peacefully removed from your territory. Like that's already an act of violence, and so we expect them to show up with that kind of violence. They'll try to frame it like we are the ones who are controlling the level of violence here, but as soon as they step foot on territory with intention to remove indigenous people, like that's violence in and of itself. And so at that point, we are, we're in defensive mode. We're land defenders. We're here to try and protect each other and to protect the territory, and we'll do so to the best of our ability, despite their show of force.
Also, with the RCMP buildup in town, like it's been nothing but lies. Like we all know that law enforcement and the Canadian government, they lie. They say that there's no helicopters circling around the camps, or that the 7-day pause, there's not going to be any like RCMP activity, but we've seen a spike of it. And now Houston, nearby towns have become heavily police state. This is what we are dealing with on the outside. I am worried about my family out there, my friends. I'm worried about people who support us, right? We don't know if they're getting harassed or targeted, or if they're going to stop our supplies. So, I mean, it's a buildup. We're in it now. This is it. We are in the raid, the nights of the raid. This is it. This is critical. This is like almost highest colonial violence that we are about to face right now. So we are here and we are doing our best to keep our spirits up, and just to be prepared for that. I'm so honored to be here with all these other people who have the heart to be here. They have the heart to face that violence, that death, to have an AKA 47 like staring down at them in their face. So, I mean, this is a type of treatment that Indigenous land defenders face. We face tasers, guns, and just fully militarized police force. So this is what is going on right now, and we're doing our best to be prepared for that mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually.
Can you talk a bit about the actions that have been taking place around Turtle Island, and specifically in so-called Canada, around solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en struggle for autonomy and against the RCMP and Canadian invasion? Like, I've just a quick look or glance at the news earlier before we chatted, and I was able to find so many occupations and banner drops and instances of sabotage.
Shilo, you want to talk about the actions?
Talk about solidarity actions.
Yeah. That's why I think it's very, I guess, imperative that other tribes get involved. Like going back to that, it's not only like this is a Wet'suwet'en fight, but it's also a human and a life fight. And this also, what happens here affects other First Nations across Turtle Island, because it shows the type of blinds that the government's trying to pull over our eyes. And if they can kind of like in a sneaky way violate some of our rights and our sovereignty, our freedoms, our hereditary rights to the land, then they can just, that sets precedent for them to do it again and again. So that's where other tribes come in, it affects us all. And that's why back home, Haudenosaunee people who've been going through a lot of these same things for a time, even back to Oka, have stood up and, have just stood in complete support of what's going on here. And so you start seeing other tribes becoming involved and standing up to let the government know that this isn't okay. Like we have the Wet'suwet'en's back. We all stick together. What affects, a few of us ends up affecting us all as Ungwahoney people, like collectively. So there's been a lot of support from all over Turtle Island, both sides of the border. Um, this is an indigenous fight as a whole. When they start taking away our rights to water and to the earth, that's who we are. So it's like complete genocide. It's a simulation into like their society and their ways. So this is where I don't know, you'll see a lot of support. It's even gone beyond indigenous support. Like there's all kinds of allies and solidarity groups out there putting in a lot of important work. So shouts out to all the other tribes and people and groups out there that have been making noise and putting work in, because we just as much as what we're doing here matters, what everyone else out there is doing matters as well. It's a big contribution to this movement. Yeah.
Anything?
Yes. Being here at camp, it's a bit of a small space. And we don't have access to much of the outside world, only through like what we can see on social media. So I mean, sometimes you forget that you're doing this big huge thing being here at camp. And so you're just busy doing your thing, and then you see all this like actions happening all over, and it lifts our spirits. I keep on saying that because it truly does. Every time we hear of an action, we share with the whole camp, and we all like cheer. We all like jump for joy. It really helps. And also, we need that support because it keeps us safe. All eyes on Wet'suwet'en right now keeps us safe from the violence that the RCMP wants to bring down on us. So we need that support. We need your actions to be as loud as their injustice. That's what I will say. And we see you, and we're here doing this with you, and we hope that you can do more actions, because we need to scream at the top of our lungs. Work, cry out.
So what do you think the next steps are? Like, obviously, immediately you need to stop the RCMP and stop the pipeline from getting built. And so if they don't actually make it through, or like push through the checkpoint, or find some other way around, what's the next step, do you think, towards dismantling the structure?
I mean, I think it's a lot of different people's responsibility to actually dismantle the structure, and this is where our like settler accomplices can come in. We just want to live here and to be able to live free on our territories, and to be able to live off of the territories, and to hunt and have this space, have the water be clean. We don't actually want to be spending our whole lives and all of our time and all of our energy fighting the state. But we're in the position to do so, and we're partially in that position because we're the biggest threat to extractive industry that's trying to destroy the planet. So it's part of the responsibility we carry, but others also have a responsibility to be doing that systematic dismantling, to be making these projects completely unviable, and that can be done in a lot of different ways. One of the ways is to stand strong on the territory and to hold the space and to reoccupy. And to answer the call of our neighboring nations and our relatives here to stand in solidarity with them, because like each of our own nations benefits from other nations from the Wet'suwet'en having freedom and autonomy on their own territory. This is a fight that's huge for all of us. It sets a massive precedent for us to be able to insist on the protection of the land and water, to insist on that not being destroyed, and on our own systems of governance and law that have pre-existed this colonial system for a long time. So yeah, I think it's a lot of different people's work, and we need help making this clear that this is like no longer an acceptable way forward. We can't continue to extract. We can't continue to destroy the little bits of clean water we have left, and that it's an absurd situation that we should have to be facing this kind of violence so that they can push forward a project that would cause that kind of destruction. It's just in no way is it worth the death of this river to get a pipeline through here. And we know that if this pipeline goes through, that there'll be a whole bunch behind them. They want to make this an energy corridor. So this won't be the last attempt to try and make it through this territory. They look at this like beautiful territory and they see an energy corridor. They see that whole row of pipelines going through over the mountain pass to the coast. And we just absolutely can't let that happen. And so anything that people can be doing on the outside as well to make sure that people who are in positions of power in the system know that that's not an acceptable option, to make investors know that it's not a viable option, that it's like a very risky investment to try and support projects that rely on Indigenous dispossession and the theft of land in order to proceed.
I think, the next steps, we're always going to be fighting. Indigenous people are always going to be fighting because it's our territories that industry and mining always go through. So there's always going to be a fight, and our Indigenous rights are never recognized in the Canadian courts. So I say for people out there to stand with Indigenous people, Indigenous land defenders, and we have to unite in this fight and just try to stop industry. Like it's so true. Like once one pipeline goes through this territory, there's going to be so many lining up at the door to get through here. And this is like all over, like Indigenous territories and reserves have hardly any clean drinking water. So we're the first communities that are affected by industry. So, I mean, I think there's always going to be a fight that we have to fight.
Is there anything that I didn't ask about that you'd like to talk about?
I might just mention also, think about how I want to phrase this. Part of what we're facing here on the ground, and people who are supporting us from nearby, and other Indigenous people who are standing up in solidarity with this fight as well, is an intensification of the criminalization of land defense. And so part of dismantling the system that is destroying the planet and is destroying our territories and the land and water is also like working towards decriminalizing land defense. Like it shouldn't be criminal to protect the land and water. And that's like, such an imbalance in this system that's the case. And so, what we're doing on the ground is like anything we can to protect this territory. And that's being met, as it always has, state repression that's trying to make our actions seem extreme and seem criminal. And so that needs to be pushed against as well. I think there's sort of excessive policing of Indigenous movements, both from the state and from environmental groups, from white liberals, that they want to set the tone. They want to tell us which tools we're allowed to use and which tools we're not in the defense of our territories. And that kind of policing needs to stop if we're going to be successful. And so really pushing back against the attempt to criminalize us, and then supporting us when that is what happens, when the state is pushing us into the jails where we're already, disproportionately criminalized and represented in the prison system. So I think it's really important to be pushing back against that as well, especially as we're amping up and getting into the space where we're going to see a raid. And they've consistently tried to paint us as is criminal and violent and extreme. And that dialogue, that narrative needs to be flipped in order to protect us, and also in order to help other movements do the same thing. Like, this is such a powerful movement out here, partially because what the hereditary chiefs recognize now is that there's no justice in the court system. There's there's no justice in Canada. Like, Canada's not a real thing, and continuing to fight through the courts has sucked a lot of money and resources out of Indigenous peoples for a long time, and it doesn't serve us. It's not meant to serve us. It's meant to dispossess us. And so we need to be taking matters into our own hands and supporting our neighbors when they do the same. That's all I got.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much for that. Are there any places that you would suggest that listeners go to get informed or keep up on your words or the experiences of other folks that are on these like front lines actually fighting and pushing back the ecocide?
So there is a Facebook page. There's the Unist'ot'en Camp Facebook page. There's the un-ceded Access Point at Gidimt'en Facebook page. They also have a Gitdimt'en Access Point Instagram, which is sort of probably the quickest place to go for updates about what's going on out here. I think those are the main ones right now that are need attention. It's true. It's all on Facebook. Sorry.
That's okay. I can also put some other. I mean, a lot of those projects also have websites that could be pointed to, and
yeah, definitely.
Cool. Thank you all so much for having this chat. And so much solidarity coming from here. I'm really pleased that we're going to get to be able to share this with audiences, and I really hope that it inspires some more like passionate struggle against the colonial monster that's destroying the world and people's lives. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
To hear the audios that we've released, including with Delina Call of the Wet'suwet'en community and Chief Smokogem of the Linksamatsu clan in the last year or so, or other words from land defense in so-called Canada, please visit our website, thefinalstrawradioshow.noblogs.org. This show will later be archived at thefinalstrawradio.noblogs.org, and you can email us with questions and suggestions at thefinalstrawradio@riseup.net or thefinalstrawradio@protonmail.com. If you'd like to use any episode for your project or radio show, feel free to do so. Just send us an email to let us know.